welcome to On This Day in Tudor History with me, Claire Ridgway, author of several Tudor history books. Now, I'm afraid I've got another bad thing for you today because something bad quite often happens in Tudor history. I've got another death for you. For on this day in Tudor history, the 3rd of November 1592, which was of course in the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, Privy Councillor and former Lord Deputy of Ireland, Sir John Perrot, died at the Tower of London, where he'd been imprisoned since March 1591. He was buried in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula at the Tower of London. In 1570, Perrot had been made Lord President of Munster, where he was successful in putting down the Desmond rebellions and had executed over 800 rebels. But he ended up leaving there without permission in 1573 after he became dissatisfied with the support, or rather lack of support, that he felt he was receiving from the Privy Council. He managed to escape a reprimand from Queen Elizabeth, even though he had left without permission. And in 1584, she even made him Lord Deputy of Ireland. But the next 4 years were a troubled time for Perrot in Ireland. He was stuck between, a rock and a hard place, trying to reward the English and at the same time trying to keep the Irish people happy. All the while, his enemies at the English court were ganging up on him. Following ill health and grief over his son's death, he asked to be relieved of his duties there and returned to England in July 1588. His enemies continued to work against him, and his successor in Ireland, Sir William Fitzwilliam, accused Perrot of treason in 1590, claiming that he'd consorted with known traitors in Ireland and had conspired with the King of Spain to depose Queen Elizabeth. Unfortunately, Perrot's main patron at this time, Sir Francis Walsingham, died in April 1590, and Perrot ended up being placed under house arrest. His enemies bayed for his blood, calling for his execution, and he was charged in December 1590 and imprisoned in the Tower in March 1591. He was tried for high treason on the 27th of April 1592 at Westminster. Roger Turvey, author of The Treason and Trial of Sir John Perrot, writes of how he was charged with using contemptuous words about the Queen, helping known traitors and Romish priests, encouraging the rebellion of O'Rourke, and lastly writing treasonable letters to Philip of Spain and the traitor Stanley. He was accused of saying, "Stick not so much upon Her Majesty's letter. She may command what she will, but we will do what we list. Ah, silly woman, now she shall not curb me. She shall not rule me now. God's wounds, this is to serve a base bastard, pissing kitchen woman. If I'd served any prince in Christendom, I have not been so dealt withal." Now, Perrot did not deny saying these words, but he denied the way that they were being interpreted and twisted against him. Although he is said to have defended himself well at his trial, he was found guilty and condemned to death. By this time, Queen Elizabeth I had saved his skin 6 times, but this time he died before she could pardon him, dying in the Tower on this day in 1592. It is not known what he actually died of, but Roger Turvey writes, "There are grounds for believing that Perrot may in fact have been poisoned. This lends credence to the idea that his pardon was imminent, since his enemies could ill afford to risk his wrath upon release." Now, Sir John Perrot is quite an interesting character. Fascinating in his own right, but also because some people believe that he was in fact Henry VIII's illegitimate son. They put forward the following arguments for this theory. His mother, Mary Berkeley, served Queen Catherine of Aragon, and the king was also a good friend of her husband Thomas Perrot, sharing a keen interest in hunting. So the king had opportunity to have an affair with Mary. Perrot was auburn-haired and tall, resembling King Henry VIII. When he brawled with 2 yeoman guards in Henry VIII's reign, he didn't get into trouble with the king, but instead was offered a promise of preferment. Mary I was quite lenient with him during her reign, even though he was a Protestant and was accused of hiding heretics and had problems with debt. He was imprisoned for a time, but he managed to survive her reign. He was favoured by King Edward VI and by Elizabeth I, who rewarded him with many grants and offices. Elizabeth I stayed judgment on Perrot on 6 occasions, and he didn't get into trouble for leaving Ireland without her permission. Writer and politician Sir Robert Naunton, husband of Perrot's granddaughter Penelope, wrote in his book that when Perrot was accused of high treason, he said with oaths and fury to the lieutenant Sir Owen Hopton, "What will the Queen suffer her brother to be offered up as a sacrifice to the envy of my flattering adversaries?" thereby claiming to be the Queen's brother. However, historian Amy Lysons and others have pointed out that there is no evidence that Perrot's mother, Mary, even served Catherine of Aragon, or that she was at court. Neither is there evidence of the king visiting the Perrots at their home in Pembrokeshire. As for Sir Robert Naunton's claim, as Roger Turvey pointed out, Sir Owen Hopton had been removed from office by the Queen 18 months prior to Perrot's imprisonment, so he wasn't there to hear Perrot speak these words. With regards to the favour that Perrot received from Edward VI and Elizabeth I, his rise at court was simply down to the connections of his stepfather, Sir Thomas Jones of Carmarthenshire, and his patrons, the friends and connections he'd made, plus all his hard work and his personality. When he was just 18, he joined the household of William Paulet and had been educated with the likes of Henry Neville, 6th Lord Bergavenny, and John de Vere, 16th Earl of Oxford. Paulet, who was knighted by Edward VI in 1549, acted as Perrot's patron, as did Sir Francis Walsingham later. Perrot was also lifelong friends with Ambrose Dudley, son of John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, and brother of Queen Elizabeth I's favourite, Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. Perrot may have had enemies, but he also had influential friends and contacts. There really isn't any hard evidence to support him being the illegitimate son of Henry VIII, but Perrot was an interesting man in his own right. And I think I'll leave you on that note rather than rewinding to his death, which we were talking about earlier. Let's concentrate on the fact that he was an interesting man who lived through troubled times. Thank you for joining me. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel by clicking round about there. And I'd ask you to do that because that really does help others to find me. And it's great to spread the word. And you can, of course, give this video a like and hit the bell to be notified as videos go live. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.